It's not good, is it? I can't remember the last time, and I don't know if there has been a time where a team has had two cars disqualified for different reasons. Two cars disqualified, yes, it's not unusual for there be, something on the cars which gets them both chucked out. I think it happened to Renault a few years ago in Japan. But two cars for different reasons is really quite poor. And we're not talking about a team that's rebuilding. If this was Ferrari, 3 years ago, it would kind of fit the bill. But this is a team that was supposed to be going into this year ready to fight for championships. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I want to say there is performance there. Of course, there was the glimmer of hope in the sprint race victory, Lewis Hamilton getting pole for the sprint and then going on to win it. That was all good news from a Ferrari perspective. And I kind of went into even Sunday, once the race had finished, thinking, well, at least there's something there. At least the performance is somewhere in that car. They just need to figure out how to access it more consistently. And then find out that two cars got disqualified is it is not good. And Lewis as well, it was a ride height issue. So basically they're running the ride too low, which meant that the plank at the bottom of the car, which basically is wood resin stuff, wore away by 0.5 millimeter more than it was meant to. I mean, that is a tiny amount, 0.5 millimeters. It's less than the width of a credit card. But still, to make that mistake, there's a reason teams don't get chucked out regularly for this. It's because, they're usually quite good at predicting it. I think the last time, funny enough, was Ferrari and Mercedes in Austin 2023, Lewis Hamilton,
It
Charles
was
LeClerc.
Lewis.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, but a different
Mhm.
team. But yeah, so but still, you just would have thought you'd have that kind of stuff under control. And at least in Austin, there was a few excuses. It was bumpy. It was also the old sprint format where they couldn't change the setup in between the sprint race, and so they only had one practice session to get it right. I'm just so surprised that Ferrari got that wrong. And then of course Leclerc was underweight, which we saw happen with George Russell in Belgium last year. He won the race and then was underweight. It can happen if you change from a preconceived pre-race idea of doing two stops to one stop, because you're going to end up with a lot more tire wear on the tires than you expected, and therefore just the physical rubber that gets flung off means the car weight comes down. And that's what Ferrari said happened. But still, come on, like they've
It
got a tough enough time as it is. They shouldn't be making these relatively simple mistakes.
it's a little bit like the number of times, and this is pre-Fred, like the number of times we would see strategy mistakes and like little errors where it was literally Ferrari shooting themselves in the foot. And then Fred came in and the vibe sort of changed and like they were never too high, they were never too low. We've talked about that already, like this season. Like Fred is the guy who's going to keep them calm when things go right. But some of those issues are like rearing their ugly head again. And it's different now. Like your expectations for Ferrari were always high because they're Ferrari. But I'm sorry, you cannot bring in Lewis Hamilton. You cannot bring in Lewis Hamilton with the expectations that just people have of Lewis Hamilton, but then you cannot bring in Lewis Hamilton with the expectations that your car is going to be great and go out and do exactly what happened in China. Like you have to be more buttoned up. You have to be better than that. So like if I'm in the Ferrari factory this week and early next week, like, what conversations are we having? What are we doing? How are we getting better?
It's a good question. I think more than anything, they need to look at the bits that are going right, the things like what happened in the sprint, and understand where that performance is. I think things like, there's no point in getting upset at people about being underweight and the plank wearing. You just got to make sure that lesson is thoroughly learned. There was during the height of the Mercedes success, it was always blame the problem, don't blame the people. And so each problem they used to say was, okay, it might have been caused by a person, but that's because that person wasn't properly equipped. They believe in all the staff that they had employed. They employed them for good reason. So you've got to look at what was that staff member doing wrong? Why did they make the mistake? And what was it that led them to make that mistake? So, and why wasn't there a double check or something? So I think those kind of stuff, that happens all the time in Formula One. It's often said as well that you learn far more from the races that you lose and you do badly than the ones you win, because there's bigger lessons to take from them, probably more obvious lessons. But I still think, yeah, they need to just really figure out where the performance is, because it seems when that car's in its happy spot, it's actually not bad. You know, it's
Oh, it's
probably
great.
not on
Like,
McLaren level, but it's within a couple of tenths. And you know, they need to find that, because problem with this season is that if you let the gaps get too big in the championship, and I know a lot of people say, well, you're getting ahead of yourself, it's only 2 races, but if you do let those gaps get too big, at what point do you say, you know what, we're going to halt our development of this year's car and focus on 2026? Because if you get 2026 wrong, then you've got, well, we're not quite sure,
27
because
wrong.
they're talking about changing regulations, but at least 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe 2, but you know, you got several years of dealing with the consequences of that.
And it's also not like, I remind you, like, what happened last year. Like, if you let the gap get too big, Lando
Yeah.
won the race in Miami, and McLaren came on strong after that. And look at, like, the gap was already too big. It was already too much. It was insurmountable in the end. So it does not take long for that gap to get out there. And yes, it, like, that McLaren looks good. I don't know if that McLaren is as good as the 2023 Max Red Bull, but that, so you have to live in a world where you're like, okay, McLaren's going to make a mistake. Like, there's going to be an issue. McLaren's going to have a day where maybe neither one of their cars are in the points. So like, it's a long season, and yes, we're only 2 races in. So you can't think that McLaren is going to be like perfect the rest of the way. But if you're making mistakes that can be avoided, if you're making those unavoidable, like avoidable mistakes, those are the things where you're like, okay, we need to button this up and make sure, because at the end of the day, those are points lost that shouldn't have been lost. And those are the things that, like, if it comes down at the end of this championship and Ferrari is not in a position, whether it's the drivers' championship or the constructors' championship, and they're looking at where they lost ground, like, you're going to go back to the second race of the season and be like, man, that was it.